Let's be real. Are you worried about tech for your podcast? How much time have you spent, and let's be real here, how much time have you spent researching the perfect microphone for your future show? What about the best hosting site or recording software? You probably see where this is going. Most people think they need state of the art equipment, software, and preferably an entire team to run a successful podcast. But even with all of that, your podcast can still struggle because the positioning and the audience were unclear from the very start. And that's exactly what we're covering today. In this episode, I will be sharing two quick stories of aspiring podcasters who approached me with concerns that are valid on the surface, but that could easily make or break their future shows, depending on the decision they make. So please stay right where you are because you need to hear this. This is Say Yes to Podcasting, where solopreneurs learn how to start podcasts that attract their ideal clients and do the marketing for them. I'm your host, Anja Lordanic. Say Yes to Podcasting today. Before we dive in, just try to take a second and think of a podcaster who failed or who stopped recording, who stopped producing their show because they didn't have the perfect microphone or because their audio quality was so bad that listeners would tune in and tune out in 2 seconds, or because their hosting site kept on breaking. I didn't think so because those are not the reasons why podcasts fail. Most people tend to obsess over the things that really are not the most crucial for the success of your future show. And by that, I mean microphones, editing, recording software, hosting platforms, you name it. The real quote unquote danger lies in wobbly foundation. Because if people cannot immediately recognize themselves and understand who your podcast is for, then you have a problem. In other words, if people cannot naturally filter themselves as soon as they see your show, then that's a problem. As promised, I will make this more tangible by sharing a couple of stories. And these are real life stories from people who approached me one to one, wanting to learn more about what their future show could look like, while in reality, they had an underlying problem that they weren't aware of. And once I pointed them out and brought them out onto the surface, things got clearer straight away. And you will see exactly what I mean. Story number one: the prospect who reached out was overly focused on tech instead of positioning her show for the right audience. So, at the very start of the conversation, she voiced her concerns regarding the recording setup, the software, the logistics of it all, and so on. Meanwhile, the actual issue, while she was describing it, was that the podcast she was aiming to create, it was trying to serve two completely different audiences. And that's a mistake a lot of people make because how can we effectively serve different audiences in the same way or using the same medium? That is not impossible, but it is extremely difficult. And most of the time, it is confusing, and you actually end up not serving either one of those audiences. And I know we all have different skill sets, different passions. We can do a lot of different things. And that is our advantage as solopreneurs. But if we're trying to create a podcast as a business tool, that means that we need to be specific. This is not to say that there is no room for a generalist business or marketing or sales podcast. There is, but it's going to be tough to stand out. If you look at it closely, my podcast, Say Yes to Podcasting, is a sort of a business podcast. But I chose a niche within business that serves a specific type of person every time they tune in to any one of my episodes. And this is exactly what I shared with that prospect. First, I listened to what she has to say because I was in her shoes. I was also confused and overwhelmed with everything. But then I told her that she doesn't need to buy a new microphone until she gets into the groove of recording and publishing podcast episodes every week. She doesn't need to have a YouTube channel. She can have an audio only podcast. She can record herself from her room, which is exactly what I'm doing right now, and not spend over 5 minutes worrying about tech. But let's just imagine if she bought a $500 microphone, started recording her podcast episodes, aiming two audiences at the same time. Imagine if she published those episodes week after week for a year and saw no traction. What kind of conclusion would she come to? It's not about the microphone at all. It's about the foundation of her podcast. What's it about? Who are you serving? What kind of problem do those people have? And what kind of solution do you offer? So please, if you're finding yourself obsessing over things such as tech and software, don't do that. Your audience matters more than how you're producing your show. If your audience cannot find its way to you, or if your listeners feel confused when they see your show out there, it doesn't really matter if you're recording from a 10K private studio. This is not to say that high quality audio is not important and that you can record out there on a street while it is windy and people can barely hear you. I'm not saying that. All I'm saying is that you can focus your time, energy, and effort on things that truly matter. Story number two, and this one will seem completely different compared to the first one at first, but then you will see that the message is basically the same. I had this one guy approach me last year, and he had a great podcast idea, but he wanted to launch it in two languages. So he wanted to have a bilingual podcast. And I know I have fellow polyglots out there listening, but if you ever do anything for your show, don't do this. Don't launch a podcast in two languages. If you're wondering why, there are many reasons. For context, this guy wanted to launch his podcast both in English and Spanish. Or to be more precise, he wanted to create some episodes in English while others would be in Spanish. I think the majority of his audience, this was a year ago, so I don't remember exactly, but the majority of his audience is Spanish speaking. But he also wanted to introduce some topics in English because he wanted to widen his reach. Okay. I explained to him immediately why that wouldn't be a good idea. But just to give you a couple of pointers in case you wanted to launch your podcast in two languages, here are some of the reasons why you should not do that. For example, if you were a potential listener of that podcast, and if you were to tune in, you saw the list of episodes, and you noticed that some of them were in English and some of them were in Spanish. You understand the ones created in English and you tune in. And let's say you do not speak Spanish, what would your first impression be? You would probably be confused. You wouldn't be sure if you were missing out on something. And most importantly, you wouldn't be sure what to expect the following week. So even though creating content in multiple languages might seem inclusive or as if you're reaching a wider audience, that is not the case. Because as we said before, if your focus is diluted, if your audience is unclear whether or not your podcast is for them, they will not be tuning in. This is just one of the reasons, or I should say, the most important reason not to create a bilingual podcast. But a couple of other that come to mind have to do with discoverability. What would your audience be typing in? Something in English or something in Spanish? And consequently, your podcast SEO would become messy because there would be no clear target audience. And please don't get me wrong, being bilingual is not an issue at all. I'm bilingual myself. Actually, I speak three languages, kind of. My Italian is a bit rusty, but English is my second language. And I only record episodes in my second language, which is English, because I wanted to have a wider reach. However, if I were to record episodes in Croatian, I would create a completely separate podcast because that podcast would be serving a completely different audience, not only in terms of language, but in terms of culture, expectations, habits. So even though it might seem logical and even attractive to combine two audiences because it might seem that you're killing two birds with one stone, do not do that if you want to create a specific podcast for a specific person, solving a specific problem for them. And if you're still not sure if you have a problem similar to what these two people experienced, and if you simply don't know what you don't know, which is completely okay, I would love to invite you to a free 30-minute coaching call for this very podcast, Say Yes to Podcasting, where we will look at your podcast idea, your positioning, your audience, the potential issues you might be facing right now, And the main goal is for you to launch with clarity, knowing exactly who you're serving and knowing exactly what kind of problem you're solving for those people through your episodes. These coaching calls will be recorded and published as episodes of this show because I want for other listeners, future podcasters, to learn from your experience. You will walk away with practical feedback tailored specifically to your situation for free, and the listeners will get to be a fly on the wall, also for free. So, from where I stand, you have nothing to lose. So, you can book your call by clicking the first link you see in the show notes. Now, let's wrap up this episode. And here's a fact: what we all want is for our podcast to work for us rather than being a weekly burden, unsure whether they're even doing their job. So, whenever you catch yourself over analyzing the unnecessary, please think of the foundation. And the foundation consists of one audience, one clear problem they're facing, and a clear solution you're offering. In other words, who are you helping solve what in which way? That is it. So, when we strip podcasting down to its core, that is what it consists of. And that is where a lot of people trip up. They start enthusiastically, they have all the ideas in the world, but that enthusiasm dies down quickly because they're not seeing the results and they're looking for answers in the wrong place. And after listening to this episode, I hope you won't be one of them. Thank you for tuning in, and I will see you next week.